Well, today I'm going to do something kind of corny. It's May the 4th, and I'm going to talk about Star Wars. And I'm specifically going to make reference to the just re released Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. It's the 25-year anniversary, roughly, since the release of Episode 1. And there may be other people here who are old enough to remember all of the, though there probably are people, a lot of people who are old enough to remember, the culture and how things were in 1999, leading up to the release of The Phantom Menace and the beginning of the prequel trilogy. But I thought it would be interesting to recapitulate that moment in cinema history in retrospect. Um, Now full confession, I was a Star Wars fan early on. It got into my blood. Star Wars, the original trilogy, was a huge part of my childhood. Star Wars came out when I was 6 years old. Empire Strikes Back came out when I was 9. Return of the Jedi came out when I was 12. And I think I've elsewhere talked about my Return of the Jedi story, what it was like to stand in line, and the anticipation, and then seeing the movie, and just how deliriously happy I was on that day. Well, really, honestly, I know this might strike some people as weird or even I don't know. I think some people might get judgmental about this and say, "Well, the happiest day of your life shouldn't be about a Hollywood movie." But I'm telling you, you're never happier than you are during your childhood. You don't realize that kind of delirious happiness many more times when you're older. You can only be happy as a child, if you have the mind of a child. If you have the consciousness of a child. Maybe that's more important than to say the mind of a child. I don't think you have to be simple-minded, but you still have to have a childlike mind to be happy like a child can be happy. And that was how I was that day when I saw Return of the Jedi. And I think I know I recorded a video about that experience elsewhere, but I don't. I know I did in my old iteration here, and I'll have to go back and see if I've told that story since they wiped out all of my videos. If I recapitulated that story or not. But today I'm not going to talk about that story. Today I'm going to talk about what it was like in 1999 when Phantom Menace hit the theaters. So 1999 was a huge year for cinema, a huge year for Kino, a huge year for movies that later were heavily mined for memes, specifically The Matrix, Fight Club, Office Space, American Beauty. It seems that there is another 1999 movie that I'm just not thinking of right now. But those are 4 movies that came out in '99 that I'm a huge fan of Fight Club. The other 3, and I'm a moderate fan of Office Space, Matrix, and American Beauty. I can appreciate certain things about them, but I don't think they're great by any means. But they had something about them that endured, something that reflected on, themes that are enduring, and that's why they've stood the test of time for a lot of people. And 1999 was also the year that The Phantom Menace came out, which also was a seminal moment for cinema, but a much more complex one, because Phantom Menace is not a great movie by any stretch. But what can we say in fairness about Phantom Menace, or the Phantom Menace? With the retrospective of a half a century, or sorry, a quarter of a century, 25 years. What can we say about this movie? I think for younger people today, it might be harder to understand the cultural importance that this movie represented, and the sort of complex specter that it became. And I use the word specter ironically here, or appropriately here, since Phantom is in the title. First of all, I love the title, The Phantom Menace. I think it's the coolest title. It's very evocative. And it makes sense in the movie, because the movie is about a phantom menace. It's about a menace that nobody can see. And nobody really even knows is there. Nobody can even really detect it, because the dark side covers everything, or hides everything. But when the movie came out, or first I'll start with the months leading up to the release of Phantom Menace. I'm remembering this because I was in grad school at the time, and I just happened to be working at a movie theater, as a part-time job, while going to grad school. So I had this I had this brief stint working at a movie theater, and first let me start by saying that the hype was unreal, and the hype was sort of overestimated. But at the time, it was like everybody knew that the original trilogy was awesome. Like there wasn't, like, now there are all these quibbles, there are all these people saying, it was overrated, blah, blah, blah. I think there was more of a consensus at the time that the first three Star Wars movies, which are, of course, episodes 4 through 6 of the Star Wars saga, but that those movies were great. And everybody had, when I say everybody, I don't mean everybody, but I'm using it, more, just to convey the universality of this sentiment. Everybody thought of those movies fondly, and thought that it was great movies, great special effects, great characters, great space battles, and so forth and so on. And now we're going to have more. Now we're returning to that universe after it looked like it was gone forever. Like the last, the previous Star Wars movie that had been released was in 1983. That was 16 years prior. So we'd gone 16 years without a Star Wars movie. And I think, there had been books, there had been comic books. I don't think there was any other media stuff. I know the Clone Wars came later, and the Clone Wars occupy a period before the Disney takeover, which was a terrible day for the world, for the world of cinematic art. I will say, a terrible, terrible day. But anyway, returning to 1999, everybody was excited. Everybody was so excited, and everybody thought, "Oh man, when that movie comes out, it's just gonna, like there's gonna be lines around the block." Because reserving tickets online was still kind of wasn't quite done that much yet. So there's going to be lines around the block, and everybody's going to want to see it, and there can't possibly be too many screenings. And leading up to the release of Phantom Menace, they actually made it so that I think it was released on a Wednesday, instead of a Friday, which is the usual day that a film is released. And I remember they had like early morning shows. Like you could go to an 8 a.m. Showing of Phantom Menace, and they had it in 2 theaters, and they had at the theater I was working, they had all of this. They'd bought all of this extra merchandise, all this extra supply of soda and candy and stuff, because they were anticipating the crowds were just going to be immense. And everybody was excited. Everybody was thrilled. But interestingly, everybody kind of overestimated how much everybody was going to be interested in this movie. Which is really kind of funny in retrospect, because, you expect that the crowds are going to be huge, and the crowds were okay. They were good. Like, okay, the movie did well. It was pulling in, a good profit. It was, it did well. I don't know. I don't remember the actual grosses now. And of course, you're comparing the $1999 to what the dollar is worth today. So all those comparisons are all kind of relative. But it was not as I don't know how to say this, but the number of people who went to see this movie was not was overestimated. And so somehow, everybody who was talking about it, everybody who was excited about it, everybody who was expecting it to be this huge smash hit, because it's new Star Wars. Everybody wants a new Star Wars movie. Everybody loves Star Wars, and now we're going to go back and see, what led to Darth Vader becoming Darth Vader, and it's gonna, and then they cast Ewan McGregor, this hot young actor, the train spotting guy. He's gonna play young Obi-Wan. So I don't think much more of the cast was. Well, there was also the famous actor cast as Qui-Gon, the Irish actor, and maybe Natalie Portman was kind of was sort of known in indie circles. She was still pretty young at the time, but anyway. So it wasn't so much about the cast, though. It was about the excitement was just, it's a return to the world of Star Wars. But the first thing that did not happen is the crowds were not they were big, but they were not astronomically huge, which is what everybody was expecting. I remember after the movie had been out for 3 or 4 weeks, somebody told me that the theater where I worked, they had all this extra stuff that just was wasted. All this extra, soda supply and candy and I guess, popcorn and whatever else. The other kinds of concessions that they charge overpriced prices for. They always have. That's been a perennial thing from the days that I first started going to movies. But they overestimated how many people were going to go, and so they overestimated how much they overestimated by a pretty wide margin how much concessions they needed. Like everybody really bought the hype because everybody was in on the hype, but then somehow the numbers of people did not exactly show up, and this is even before word of mouth started. When people started talking about Phantom Menace, people were really there was a lot of negative word of mouth, especially about Jar Jar Binks, and just like stilted dialogue, and I don't know. It was too long. There was too much boring stuff about intergalactic politics that nobody was interested in. These were the sort of critiques that you heard at the time, and the acting was bad. There wasn't really all that much said at the time about the CGI effects, the special effects, which were so heavily CGI'd. Everything happening in front of a green screen, and like Jar Jar Binks was just a CGI character, and that was so. And when Yoda came, Yoda was no longer a puppet. It was a CGI computer graphics created entity, and so many things in the movie were CGI. Now today those effects look kind of outdated, but in 1999 people hadn't yet started complaining about CGI, the overuse of CGI, and how they really had, there was this like kind of nostalgia for the pre-CGI days where people had to be actually there in a rubber suit or in a metal robot costume or what have you, and like Jabba the Hutt had to be this huge puppet who couldn't actually move anywhere, and that wasn't really complained about until later. But people did say that Phantom Menace was a disappointment. Now, I at the time remembered thinking, yeah, this isn't as good as the original trilogy, but I was still on board with it. I thought, in spite of everything about it that is disappointing to some, the things that people complained about being corny, Jar Jar's existence, Jake Lloyd, the little boy who plays young Anakin, who's not very good, but he's like a little kid. I mean, I think, I didn't really want to. I think complaining that much about a little kid's acting is, I can see how that could be like that can affect someone's young mind, but and I know Jake Lloyd has had a rough life, but I somehow think his rough life hasn't so much stemmed from the way people complained about his performance in The Phantom Menace, and probably has more to do with the culture of Hollywood. I'll just leave it at that. We know what happens to children in Hollywood. All right, I'll just leave it at that. But I was holding on. I was not a hater at the time. I was on board. I was like, yeah, this isn't as good as the original trilogy, but I'm still happy to have Star Wars back. And I also saw things that I think other people were dismissing. I think there's a sophistication to that movie and to the entire original trilogy, in that the villains are hidden from us, hence the Phantom Menace. And the very first line of dialogue in the movie is Obi-Wan saying, "I've got a bad feeling about this." This was both a knowing joke that George Lucas threw in at the time, because the phrase "I've got a bad feeling about this" gets repeated over and over again in the original trilogy. And I think at the time of the original trilogy, nobody really thought about it. Well, we're overusing this phrase. Everybody, this phrase is happening. This phrase is being uttered so often to presage some moment of suspense, or some moment where things take a turn for the worse. And so it's making fun of that. It's making fun of that whole phenomenon of that particular phrase of dialogue. But I think it's also hinting at this hidden evil that is the Phantom Menace. And the Phantom Menace is partly young Anakin Skywalker, who's going to eventually, we know, become evil, choose the dark side. And this whole trilogy is going to be the story of Anakin Skywalker going to the dark side. But it's also, and this is something I watched a video with Jeremy Johns, where he's talking about the Phantom Menace. He's actually his video gave me this idea to do my own video. His is a lot more succinct than mine is, but in his video he talks about how the real star of the first three movies, the real star of the prequel trilogy, is Ian McDiarmid. And I can remember his name for some reason, but I can't remember the much more famous guy who played Qui-Gon. But the one who played Palpatine. And I think what's really cool about Phantom Menace is the character of Palpatine, and how his manipulations are so subtle. Like, he's the one who's really starting everything. He's making the separatist movement start, and at the same time he's manipulating this crisis on the planet Naboo, which leads to him being appointed chancellor, or taking over as chancellor. He starts out as just a senator, and he always seems, and in Phantom Menace, he seems like a nice guy. He seems like a good man. The only times we see the truth of who he really is when he appears as Darth Sidious, and there he's got his hood down over his face, so you can't really tell necessarily that it's the same man. But that's when Darth Sidious is communicating with Darth Maul, and telling him to do this and do that. So what I think is really interesting about the Phantom Menace, and I think I'll give myself credit, I'll pat myself on the back for actually seeing this at the time. There's so many times where somebody says, there's a line that gets repeated a lot in the movie that I'm just remembering now, is "you assume too much." That's a line that a bunch of characters say over and over and over, or characters say, not over and over, but different characters say it at different times. "You assume too much." So everybody, nobody knows what's really going on except Palpatine. And he is inscrutable. When you see his face, he doesn't look like he's not rubbing his hands together, doing the Emperor thing, saying good. He's thinking that, but it's a subtle, restrained performance, and he gets the good guys, the really sincerely good people like Senator Amidala, Natalie Portman, gets her to, appoint him or support his appointment to the chancellorship. So none of the good guys have any idea. They've got no idea that not even Yoda. You'd think that Yoda would be on top of this, but he doesn't know. Nobody knows. Nobody in the Jedi Council knows that Palpatine's an evil man. That he's secretly a Sith Lord, manipulating everything. And that's the really cool thing about the Phantom Menace. Now, I think that it took the Disney takeover, and it took the sequel trilogy for people to say, wait a minute, what Lucas did with the prequel trilogy when Lucas was still in charge. That's actually not that bad. It's actually it's to say it's not that bad. I know that sort of sounds like damning with faint praise, but at the same time, I think gradually people just saw that the sequel trilogy was not Star Wars, and it was obvious that these were other minds besides the actual creators of Star Wars, chief among whom was George Lucas, but there were others. But this was a whole different thing. This was a pandering thing. This was a trying to do fan service, by reintroducing the whole aesthetic of the original trilogy with stormtroopers and Star Destroyers and all the Empire stuff, which Lucas said. I remember his commentary on that was, they're not doing anything new. I wanted to do new things and show people something that they hadn't seen before. But in the first of the sequel trilogy, The Force Awakens, they had all this fan service-ish kind of stuff, which really rang hollow because the villains weren't nearly as compelling. It wasn't clear who how the First Order even came to be so soon after the Empire was overthrown, and so forth and so on. Nothing really made sense. And then there was all of the pandering, woke stuff, the pandering to woke politics and feminism and so forth, which got much worse with The Last Jedi, but was there from the beginning of the sequel trilogy. But Lucas Lucas was a liberal, dyed-in-the-wool, Marin County, Northern California liberal. He thought he saw the Empire as analogous to the United States, and he saw the Rebel Alliance as analogous to the Viet Cong in the Vietnam War. So he definitely wasn't, right wing by any stretch, but he wasn't woke. He wasn't politically correct. He wasn't about, he wasn't the kind of liberal leftist that came to represent liberal politics in recent years, in the last decade or so. And so you didn't, you still had a mostly white cast. Most of the heroes were men. Although Princess Leia and Princess Amidala in the prequel trilogy are both, strong, resourceful women. It's not there's not feminism being pushed in your face. It's not like, this is, watch them humiliate the men, and isn't that cool to have a girl boss show all the men what's up. That's not the agenda of those wasn't the agenda in the original trilogy or in the prequel trilogy. So anyway, to sum up, I, like Jeremy Jahns and like others, Well, I'm a little bit different from Jeremy Jahns in that I think Jeremy Jahns said years later he came to appreciate the Phantom Menace in ways that he didn't at the time. I think I always saw that there was something there, and it wasn't that I didn't see the stuff that other people felt so disappointed by. It wasn't that I didn't see that some of the dialogue was quite stilted and some of the acting was poor, and later the special effects became dated, and I wasn't like many others. I wasn't a fan of George Lucas going back to the original trilogy and throwing in all this CGI stuff to try to update it. Having Mos Eisley feature CGI stormtroopers riding riding dinosaurs or whatever those things were. I wasn't a fan of all of that, but I still saw there was still all I can say is, I started out this video by talking about how the child in me responded to Return of the Jedi. And it wasn't that I would watch Return of the Jedi now and say, wow, yeah, this is a great movie. I still like it, but I can see the flaws very much. But as a child, I know what I responded to was something real. And that same real spirit is there in the Phantom Menace, and I think it's there in the prequel trilogy, but not in the sequel trilogy. Even though you could say the sequel trilogy has overall better acting, better special effects, of course, not as much, corny looking CGI and other stuff, but spiritually speaking, it just doesn't have what any of the first 6 movies have, and that's why I don't include episodes 7, 8, and 9 as canon, because they just don't have that same spirit. They're not animated by that same spirit. So just to repeat, I think what I always saw, well, again, I'm patting myself on the back here, but I think what I always saw came to be appreciated by others, which is that there is a sophistication to the storytelling, but it's something that's hidden. It's something that's as subtle as the title, The Phantom Menace, where nobody even refers to a Phantom Menace. Nobody even says it's like there's some kind of Phantom Menace out there. But yet it's such an appropriate title because evil is lurking beneath the surface, and nobody knows its identity but us. That's what's so cool about it. Ultimately, I think, when we can see, when the audience knows, the audience is clued in, but none of the characters on the screen, and they're all these, smart, like heroic people, but they don't know what's really going on. They don't sense the Phantom Menace. They sometimes get maybe little hints that things aren't quite right, but they don't know where to look. They certainly don't blame Emperor or then Senator or Chancellor Palpatine for it. They think Palpatine's a good guy who's trying to do what's right, trying to handle this difficult situation. Anyway, those are my thoughts, and I think maybe I should do another video, because this one's already gone on too long. Yeah, I think I will do that. So thanks for watching, and tell me your thoughts below.